Sure, go for it.
Great. Well, hi everybody. My name is Sean Barnes. I'm the gallery coordinator here at the Leonore R. Fuller Gallery. You are in the black box at SPSCC in the Kenneth J. Menard Center for the Arts. Thank you all for coming this evening and wearing masks, going through all the protocols. I realize it can be a little tense at times navigating right now, but thank you all for coming. I just want to remind you all that this talk is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube, and later it will be archived on our webpage for the gallery in Janice Arnold's portfolio. You can revisit the talk anytime. Make sure that your cell phones are all switched off, please. That would be great. And then also, just in my opening remarks, I'd like to remind everyone that we are on Indigenous land. And so I have a statement here that's prepared for you all. South Puget Sound Community College is located on the ancestral lands of the Stechas band of the Squaxin Island tribe and the Squally Indian tribe, who have long been stewards of the region's waters, plants, and animals. The southernmost point of the Salish Sea, these lands were, and still are, a place of gathering, trade, and community for many Coast Salish peoples. We recognize that all who are not Salish peoples are visitors here. We commit to join these peoples to share history, build relationships, increase representation, and restore the living world around us. So also, I have just a couple of announcements for the gallery going into the rest of this year and carrying out the rest of the academic year at SPSCC. On November 8th, November 7th, the Native American Art Exhibitions will be the 13th year that we've hosted the Native American Art Exhibition. That will open up and carry out the rest of the quarter until December 10th. Phil Red Eagle is our curator again this year, so that's going to be a really great show. After that, and after the Christmas break, our annual Fine Art Postcard Exhibition goes up, and this year's theme is the devil is in the details. Devil's in the details. I have copies of the prospectus in the gallery if anyone's interested in donating a postcard work for that exhibition. And that opens on, let's see, January 7th, I think, is the opening reception. I need to revisit those dates. And so tonight, we're really excited to welcome award-winning artist and lecturer Janice Arnold. Janice's commissioned work is in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian and private clients around the globe. She has exhibited and lectured at the State Museum of Kyrgyzstan, Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt, National Design Museum, Azerbaijan Carpet Museum, San Francisco Museum of Craft and Design, Grand Rapids Art Museum and Bellevue Arts Museum. She is the recipient of numerous awards and grants, notably an Artist Trust Fellowship, American Craft Council Rare Craft Fellowship Finalist Award, Woolmark Grant, and special recognition from the Mongolian Embassy for her cultural education outreach. Tonight I'm very pleased to present Janice Arnold.
It is a pleasure to be here, and first of all, let me just get my slide presentation switched over for a moment. So first of all, I just have to say how much I appreciate all of you. I learned tonight that this is only the second in-person event that the college has had in, a year and a half. And I hope this is a sign of more to come, but I really appreciate the fact that you're here and spend your Friday evening with me. I also need to thank Sean. I sort of see installation work as a thrill sport. And he's been a great head coach and a ladder climber. I have to say, I've talked in some pretty crazy places. I think the furthest away is Baku, Azerbaijan. But I have to say, I am nervous. And I know this is probably the most forgiving audience possible, but because of that, because you are my community and my friends and people that have helped me and all the people out in Zoom land that are listening live tonight, I am just very connected to you and have such, I'm humbled by the assistance and reverence and loyalty that everyone has shared. Many of you, I want to see how many of you have helped me, have volunteered or worked with me. Just raise your hand. See, like, these are the people that have slogged in the water and marched around in bare feet on soggy, mossy, primordial felt, and I'm grateful for that. And for the Barb McConkey I know is here. She has been the incredible support and exhibition ear, and Lisa Mothersbaugh, who's probably listening from Seattle, but she also was here for Installation Week. Rob and Susan Allsweet have been my patron saints of art, and there's just a number of people that I know I'm forgetting, but friends and also family. My son is here. He started making felt when he was 11. And that's, really special that you're here. And his girlfriend has helped me make this presentation much more polished than it would have been. So, also to the artists, to the collaborating artists, it's just really an extraordinary experience to sort of branch out and do this in more en masse, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I like to start every presentation with an acknowledgement of the origins of felt, because it is our first fabric. And Kyrgyzstan, in 2001, I was in Kyrgyzstan, and this is the motherland of felt. This is where people are born in felt, they live in felt, and they die in felt. It is a sacred material because it is a fabric of survival. And so this process in Central Asia is part of the language. In this country, it is not as well understood. And so making felt defies the logic in this culture, and also we don't have enough language for it. So I want everyone to know that the skin of yurts is felt and has been for thousands of years. It's all because of the fiber wool. Wool is unique among fibers, and it is the structure of this fiber that is the result of millions of years of evolution, which allows sheep to live in and survive in climate extremes. Sorry about this. People are sending me messages through the iPad. I might need some technical help on how to turn that off. Volume, please. Fabulous. Thank you. Wool is nature's technology. It's still happening. Mercury, we can thank for this, okay? And I have learned not to harness this process of making felt, but to collaborate with it. And as an artist, I think you could say, developed an intimate relationship that has allowed me to push it to the boundaries that many people have not been able to do. And that is because I learned trial by fire. I can't tell the story tonight of how my first felt making project happened, but it was a trial and error and embracing mistakes. And so I'm hoping tonight that we can cover a little history, a lens into my process, explain the gene sculpture and the whole installation and how it works together, and also let you hear from some of the artist collaborators. And there are many layers to this exhibition, and I'll do my best to try to dissect it in a way that will make sense. So this is why the word felt is confusing. In Central Asia, there are actually hundreds of words for this material. Just like in Eskimo culture, there's hundreds of words for snow. But it's the variations that, that define it in our language, that we don't have the words for it. So this is my favorite sentence and explains the reason why I capitalize the word felt when I'm writing. So now that we've gotten that detail over. So here's a design board that shares the underlying nomadic philosophy that has informed this exhibition and inspired the inclusion of video, photos, and wrapping the gallery and with the ceilings and walls of the fabric. I'm going to read it to you because I think my handwriting may be a little hard to read. The old Kara Kyrgyz send their ideas, oy, their way of life, through the patterns, oyum. Everything is alive without end. The rocks, land, air, water. Nature is alive. The tree of life articulates cosmological ideas about the heavens and relationships between people, their environment, and the wider cosmos. Men and women make felt, incorporating their respect for their ancestors, with simply their skill as artisans, and through the patterns and colors they use, they bind in their belief that their own sense of beauty and the beauty and balance of the world. So when you go back into the installation, I hope that you will think about this fact, because this, to me, in Kyrgyz terms, is talking about this multiverse and how we are all connected. So here's an image of some of the fabric that's hanging in the gallery as part of the installation. And there is a backstory to it that I'll talk about later, but I spent 3.5 years as a full-time caregiver of my parents, and each natural edge, each foot of natural edge of the pieces hanging here and also in the gallery represent the 1,189 days I spent caregiving. And in honoring that process and this fabric, I also just want to honor my origins. I'm the youngest of 4. I don't remember toys, just tools. And I learned to sew by altering the hand-me-downs from my siblings. My mother was a professional homemaker and still making cookies at 97, the week she died. And my father was a civil engineer by day and a cartographer by night. And he worked until a few weeks before he died at 96. So I came from this family where passion and work were very blended. It was a black and white world. And as soon as I could walk, I became the youngest member of the Arnold family survey crew. Because my father, who was a cartographer, would take weekends and take the family and go out and measure new roads. Of course, as the youngest, I thought that was really exciting because I got to hold the end of the surveyor's tape. But it helped me gain this sense of scale at a very early age, because I'd watch my dad then go back to his drawing room with a slide rule and translate our measurements into dots and lines on his linen master map with India ink. And I learned through the printing process in a time that's passed about the negative and positive aspects of printing, and the sense of seeing landscapes in fabric came quite naturally to me. It wasn't hard for me to visualize the shrinkage that happens. So everything you see that I've made is actually about 25 to 35% smaller than when I started. And my first felt project, I had not made any large-scale material. In fact, I had to study this image and a few others of ethnographic felt making in order to learn how I could make large pieces. And I didn't have a camel, I didn't have a horse, but I thought I have a car and a family, and lots of friends. And so this was 1999 when I made my first 1,200 square yards of handmade felt. I'm going to show you a video now that explains the process better than I can ever describe of how you make felt. And it is a new, it's not the pulling it behind the car anymore, as you'll notice. So it is one slab of thick felt. This is actually a piece of 22 slabs. So imagine we're making just one. I buy as much wool from local farms as I possibly can. They use shearers, and this is re-emphasizing the fact that this fiber is evolved, and it's a technology that comes from the sun and the earth and grass. So doing a layout is what I call laying the fibers down to make a piece of felt. 12 inches of fiber will shrink down and become one thick piece of felt. And there's a piece like that in the exhibition you can see. I work outside. It's in any weather. There is, in Central Asia, a season to make felt, but thanks to commissions, I don't always get to follow that. And here is my rolling machine, where it has helped me modernize. The principles are still the same: hot water, shrinking the wool fibers, agitation and pressure. And it becomes, it's a very slow process. You don't just step on it and it becomes felt. It's a process of manipulating and talking to and working with the fibers. The only way I know it's dry is to weigh it, because wool absorbs moisture in such a remarkable way. So just to mention, there are videos in the exhibition that if you have a QR code, there is a wall of forms of felt. Because felt, one of the confusions of felt is that people don't realize it's so versatile and so many different forms that can be made. And in my own work, I have kind of tried to make the thickest possible handmade felt and the thinnest possible handmade felt. And the thinnest is what you're seeing here, is the extreme opposite of what you saw me making in that previous video. This fiber that you see in this photo and in the gallery is about 1/2 ounce per square foot, whereas the thick felt is like 2 pounds a square foot. So that gives you an idea. This is an unusual opportunity to be able to educate yourself with a tactile vocabulary and also a visual vocabulary to understand this material better. So the panels in the exhibition and the nature projections are and started out to be the anchor for this exhibition. John Carlton from Tacoma, who is a amazing, I think he's a videographer and a filmmaker, but he took on my footage for the last 3 years and projected it on the layers of screens that are in the gallery. And he made my footage look phenomenally good, and I'm grateful for that. So I'm going to leap into kind of talking about this exhibition, and those of you who've seen my work before There are some definitely experimental things here and things that I'm branching into. And those are collaborative sculptures, some photography, and also these projections and the layered quality of being able to express myself through the visual, not just a tactile. So last year, during the pandemic, I was invited to work with two very remarkable Los Angeles designers. Liam Young is a speculative architect who designs environments for the TV and film industry. And Anna Crabtree, you might have known her work or seen her work. She designed the costumes for The Handmaid's Tale. So this was a dream team of people who wanted to work with me, and of course I said yes. And for them, made some really sumptuous textiles and textures that were all for a movie called Planet City. Liam actually has a TED Talk right now about this movie. And this is a 24-foot long, started out 34-foot long piece of double-sided metallic material for part of this movie. The other thing they asked for was fabric that sort of had a reference to reusability, because Planet City is the imagination of the future in a place where people don't make anything new but reuse everything that they already have. And so if you've been in the gallery, you've seen the bench that is also felt, but it's a different form of felt called needle punching. And it started out where I had to buy all of these used, repurposed jeans, and I was stripping them. I was mining them for their denim so that I could make that fabric. And anybody who sews knows that the hardest part of a pair of jeans is the zipper and the pockets and the waistband and the button loops, and I was struck. It's almost like these skeletons started to speak to me. And it was pretty strange, because in their empty state, they completely were the metaphor for what's going on in the world. We are exploiting the environment, we're exploiting people, we're exploiting resources, and I realized that I had a connection to these makers. We are all makers in a sense, and if we've made anything with our hands, you can't deny the fact that these genes were deserved respect. We already take advantage, we already take for granted our clothing. But these are textiles that we all have a tradition of wearing textiles. We just don't think about where they came from. So I could not throw those skeletons away. In fact, I hung one immediately. And I hung it in my studio, and I swear, Sean will understand this, it started talking to me. It's like this, I felt a camaraderie with this piece. It was beautiful in its own form, and went a step further to wire it. So I wired the seams, and it took on a life form. And I thought, and I told both the designers for this movie, I've got to do an exhibition with these. These are such a representation of all that's right and all that's wrong with the world. There's metaphors for our unraveled world are here in this gene. And so as I'm thinking about the exhibition, and I'm imagining the Cave of Memories pieces hanging, lining the gallery, and all of these sculptures empty, and I'm wiring them, I realize they're all made around the world. The clothes we wear are made globally. And I started realizing, if I hang these sculptures, it's going to be a message about death and loss and destruction. How can I, in a positive way, give back to these makers who made these pants or wore these pants and honor this utilitarian art form? And I knew at that point, and this is like a month and a half before the show was to open, that I needed to invite a collection of artists that would help honor the global quality of these pieces. So I invited 9 artists, many of them are here tonight, to take one of these bare bones wired sculptures and reinvent the skin as a personal gesture that would heal the gaps and the loss, and stretch each artist's view of looking at the world through the recreation of these jeans so that they were actually whole again, and not just jeans again, but something better, something more hopeful. And so this collaborative work has become like just the focus of this beautiful place under the Cave of Memories, which is perfectly suited to respond to their conversation in that there's indigo dye used in the material, and it's the whole concept of the Cave of Memories, which you will learn about later, speaks to this honoring and regeneration and the spiral sign of life. So together, these artists celebrate the honor the material and the makers with a confluence of hearts, hands, and creative spirit to shape a new hopeful perspective for the future. And there is a gallery guide in the exhibition that has a page for each artist, and they go in depth talking about their work and their reasons that they made the pieces they did. So I want to go back there, just 1 minute. So the other thing I'm hoping to do is have a small catalog, and because I think that more people could benefit from this project, and I'm hoping that it can maybe travel to another city and include more artists, so that pretty soon we have an army of jeans that are representing and honoring the makers. So one of the other things you'll see in the exhibition is photography. And thanks to my friend Pat Wald, who she came over to my house, and I'm crouched in the grass taking photographs of with my macro lens, and she said, "You're going to thank me for this someday." But I got into really discovering another level of reality, really. And I also started looking at the ephemeral life and world within my textiles. So on the left is a piece of felt that I made. Actually, it's a wearable scarf. And on the right is a photograph of the frozen water within that fabric. And I use both, on the left, I tried doing some higher tech imagery, which is wonderful, but it's not as spontaneous as what I found with my iPhone. But it is so rejuvenating to think that within our material there are other universes. And one of my favorite pastimes is to hang my fabric outside, watch how it responds to the environment, and then photograph it. And this is a bead of water on a wool fiber. So I'm going to take a little break now. This is also a piece of the Cave of Memories piece, and invite and talk to the artists who are here about their collaborative piece. And I'll pose a question, if you don't mind, the first thing, and then maybe we can pass the mic around. I'm curious. I'd say I know all but 3 of you when I started out, and now I feel like we are a community of, like, family. But I'm curious to know what was the hardest thing about this collaboration, and also what was the most enjoyable or rejuvenating thing about the collaboration. And feel free to say a few words. I'll put this image back on the screen so people can have a face that connects to the piece that's in the show. And thank you, Sean, for helping pass the mic. Who wants to start? And tell us your name.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gina Vitale. I did the piece. I'm a jeweler, so I loved the fact that I was able to collaborate with other artists, working on the same thing but in our own mediums. That was very exciting to me. It came at a really good time as well. So I'd like to start with just how I work in general, which is I'm extremely spontaneous, so whatever I was doing at the time is kind of what went into this piece. And I happened to have been reading, I had just done a collection of my own that was celestial in nature. And I was reading this book by Carlo Rovelli, who happens to be an Italian theoretical physicist. And I said, oh, perfect, this is great. So reality is not what it seems, was what I was reading. As soon as I started working, because I'm a performance artist from my past life, I always choose a soundtrack. So Max Richter is a German composer who does a lot of haunting sort of skyscape melodies that was also perfect. So I've been wrapped up in this complete symbiosis of different types of art around this. So on the left side, as you're looking at the piece, this is micro. This is the micro, the inner, and on the right is the macro, and it's the galaxies and the light years away. So actually I have this book with me because I noticed that one of his illustrations talking about Brownian movement, which is basically talking about how everything is granular. It happened to look just like my jewelry, and I said, I'm just going to put that on there. So it's a piece that also talks about the present moment, and that the name of the piece is Personal Gravity. The present moment invites us to just pause, and what we've all been through, we don't even understand how it's shaken us, and this opportunity to acknowledge it, but then think about how we want to go forward was really powerful. So I have included a personal gravity to pause in the present moment, and the piece itself, you can see, if you look at it, just drops of water, and the one grain of pollen that is being shifted through space, being pushed and pulled minutely. And as you see, the other side is the galaxies, and you can see that they're not that different from the inner. The macro and the micro aren't that different. So it reminds us that it's very important to dream, and that we really are made of the same stuff as the stars are. And this has been great. And the hardest part was editing myself, and but even that was actually joyous. So it was great.
Lucy?
Yeah, you would raise your hand. You got in there first.
All right, I didn't mean to, I was trying to fill a void. My name is Heather Taylor, and I had Cambodian genes, and I'm preoccupied with the alchemy of art and nature, and to go with the fractal nature, that statement is above, so below, is within, so without, as the universe of the soul. And the material aspect of the genes, and then recreating it, using both art and nature, what I call creation with a little and a big C. So you can't really see, but on one side, the left to us facing it, I actually put in feathers and shells and crab shells, and the hardest part, I guess, was sitting with the process that didn't make sense in the moment. Art is a process, right? And we think of it as a product, and it's a noun and a verb. So it's not as confusing as felt. So I went on a rite of passage, which was about death and rebirth, which was akin to this. And so I gathered those shells and different things by a dead seal on my rite of passage. So they seem to come with the transformation and the alchemy. And I included, because it was from Cambodia, Buddhism and animism are two of the religious philosophical underpinnings. And so I included art that I had created in miniature, as well as my own alchemical transformation, and some glittery gold as well. Thank you, Janice. It was really lovely.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I am Lucy Gentry. I am primarily, or I've been for probably 30, 40 years, a costume designer. I've worked all over the country. Oh, can you guys talk louder? Okay. And I've known Janice for a number of years. I started out making Christmas Santa costumes and other things with her. I've enjoyed my experience working with her very much. I would say my favorite part of this collaboration was actually coming here and setting up with Janice and her amazing colleagues, Barb and Lisa. And I think something, coming from a theater background, I can address and speak to collaboration and setting up a good work environment. And you're not going to get volunteers to come in and work with you unless you create this wonderful work environment and you treat your staff golden. So Janice, thank you.
And to you, Lucy, for your steadfast, not only support of the arts of Olympia, but your generous sharing of your studio and your handwork and your amazing abilities.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I would say the hardest part for me was working with a new material I've never worked with. And something that I'm very passionate about right now is we have so much waste that we're putting into the environment, and the clothing industry is the second largest problem with pollution going into our oceans, into our land, sorry. So it's important for me over the pandemic, I've been doing a lot of research on how to make my own fabric. So I started researching how to make kombucha. And for those of you that don't know it, you can grow your own kombucha at home, of course, and people use it as a drink, but I was looking, how do I develop it into a fabric? So it was something that usually takes several weeks. It can take up to 2 months to grow. Janice walked in my studio one day and saw what I was working on and said, oh my gosh, you've got to use this new material. Well, I started making it, and I was very inspired by the Japanese technique of using boro-boro, all the hand stitching, repairing your garments. And I started making all these big pieces of this and realizing I didn't have enough fabric. I couldn't throw it at the time. And Janice walked in one day and she said, you don't need to fill the whole thing in. So it was like a light bulb went off, and I changed my whole, what I was going to do with the blue jeans, and built a structure in the inside to support the fabric. And then I started designing around how the fabric grew. And it grows in these beautiful little thin layers. And so I started pulling the thin layers, and I created the garment doing this. And I actually have a sample I'll pass around if you guys want to take a look at it. And it's frightening because I'm still learning this process and my drawing and how do I stabilize the fabric, but I am working on developing some handbags with this new fabric. So thank you guys.
Well, and I also just want to comment that the part of the wonderful part of collaborating is trusting another person and sharing your opinions without being critical, but just exploratory. And that's true collaboration, is when two people bring two ideas together and you come up with a third, even better idea. And so it was just so incredible to see what you're doing and how pushing the limits, being willing to make a mistake, being willing to explore, that's what it's all about as far as making art from my perspective. And I see you doing the same thing, so,
It's scary.
yeah.
And I am going to be working next on making fabric out of seaweed, combining wood chips and different kinds of wood with seaweed. So at some point, I'll have a show.
I can second Lucy. I'm Renee Westbrook. There is no E after the brook. Oops.
I'll fix that right now.
My pants are, I'm a sculptor, classical sculptor by training. Make a living as a painter and a photographer. You will find photographs in lots of my work. I talked to Janice on 2 occasions, and my first occasion, it was, and this encompasses what was the most difficult. My first occasion with Janice, whom I did not know, but had been introduced by Lucy, who allows me to work in her studio, which is what she referenced, which was wonderful. And my thought was, if you work with felt, and I'm working with textiles, I'm not sure the bridge between the two. I tend to overthink. I like contemplation, and I felt that I wasn't working quite on the direction or the wavelength. And then she quite astutely told me I was overthinking it. And I did some research on where my pants were from, which was Bangladesh. And my approach was to look at the textile fast fashion industry and the exploitation that comes with these beautiful structures that we wear as clothing. And so my approach was both symbolic and literal. So every rung of the clothesline, it's a Chinese paper with gold threading, and each one of those sheets have vintage photographs from several centuries. Well, the 20th century, the 19th century, and now the 20th century. So the idea was that people in Bangladesh are exploited, and we use their clothing. Before, in the 18th century, of course, we exploited immigrants who came to this country, and then we farmed that out in the late 20th century, far more in the 21st century, as we know. So the tags, each one of those rungs are littered with tags, and on one side are images of pant legs with an opening, and on the other side is history notes of the exploitation of the people of Bangladesh and what they've gone through. And at the very end, I have an aunt who worked in the fashion industry, and in these big rooms, you had the designers in one room and the workers at the tables in the other, and they had tags for all of the different brands that they were working and had to farm the clothes out. And what I did is I took the bottom of the pants and cut those alleged, tags, the labels, to symbolize both the completion of the work and the labor, the sweat, and also there have been many, many, many injuries and deaths and from the exploitation. So it's more of a social commentary than an artistic structure, but I wanted to use both what Janice had allowed us to, she said, go for it, whatever you want to do. And I was on a deadline. I had a big show coming up at a museum just 2 weeks before, and so I really had to think fast. So the best part of this project for me was that I was able to accomplish something that I felt was cohesive and, in tandem with what she wanted, and also something I could step away from and say, yeah, I get that. I've made my point. It's the casualness of exploitation, which is what it's called. And I felt that was really important. And then, of course, I walked into the show and saw the work that Janice had done and that I was included in. And I was really gobsmacked because I had not, unlike Lucy, who was very familiar with Janice's work, I had no idea about Janice's work. And once I had seen the depth and the breadth of her vision, I was really, really humbled by it. And the fact that she's allowed each of us to take an idea that she sort of originated and then let us launch into a whole nother idea, I thought was quite original, and I love the inclusion, and I must thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, Renee. It's been a pleasure. And Malvina, I think. It's hard for me to see all of you. I've never talked in front of an audience that's wearing masks, so it's a little interesting. And yes, you can take your mask off.
Okay.
So I can't talk without using my hands or using visual aids, I'm a visual artist. And first of all, I'm going to thank Janice for the invitation. I was so excited when she contacted me. And the opening line to your email was, "Are you still in Olympia?" And I went, yes. And so we met, and I was inspired by this whole project. And so Janice started out by sending me labels. I think we had multiple exchanges, maybe 30, 40 labels of different brands of jeans, and the inside label of the fabric content and what country they're made. And so it was wonderful. I really appreciated all that. And so then I took the deep dive and researched jeans. And I discovered lots of new things I didn't know. Levi's, of course, are made in this country, and they were made originally for men. And I think it was the miners that somebody started sewing jeans, and that's why they have the copper rivets. It's from the miners, and they held up really well because the rivets kept everything in place up here. And so, but today, the Levi's are made here, well, quote, they're assembled here, but all the fabric's imported because we don't have any fabric mills anymore in America. And so then I started taking the deep dive into all these different brands. There's Faded Glory from Walmart, there's Cut, there's Gap, etc. Well, then I came across some history, and Gloria Vanderbilt, we all know that brand, she revolutionized jeans to fit women. This was before Bill Blass, before Calvin Klein. She was the one. She said, we can't wear those Levi's, they don't fit our bodies. And so she designed jeans to fit women's bodies. And so I started out by finding images and interesting text from the internet, and I made collages, kind of the old-fashioned way. And then through the collages, I made negatives and made cyanotypes. And I chose cyanotypes. It's an alternative photography process because I love that blue. This is a reject, so it's not quite as intense as the one in the gallery. And then on the inside, my collaborator, Victoria Bjorklund, who's really a master of cyanotypes, we worked together to print these. We found a chart that identifies the countries that we were focusing on. And this one is Jordan, and what they get paid per week. And so it was very revealing what people get paid per week and what their cost of living is to sustain themselves. And so we just had a wonderful time researching and making these cyanotypes. And so this one is Faded Glory. And if you remember, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a huge factory fire in Bangladesh, and hundreds of people died. And that's because the building wasn't up to code. They had extension cords all over the floor. There was fabric remnants and thread, and that started the factory fire. And all 4 floors of the factory collapsed. And so we learned a lot.
Right, and that was the cutoff at the end for
Yes.
beautifully aligned. Thank you.
And so, Janice, thank you for the invitation to participate and for this journey. It's been wonderful, amazing, and the hardest part was when you said October, and I said October 2022, and she said no, 2021. Anyway, it was wonderful. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Malpina. And I know everyone deserves a lot of credit for the fact that this idea evolved, as I mentioned earlier. It evolved in a way that was so profoundly current that I felt like I would just invite people and see if they're willing to try it, and fully expecting not everyone to embrace the idea. And I'm just so grateful that everyone did. And to the artists that weren't able to come tonight, the remarkable diversity in the pieces and how they work together is just part about the synchronicity, not only of the genes, but also just about the creative spirit. And with that mention, I'm going to jump to the end of my presentation, which is talking about the process for the Cave of Memories pieces. Because as you saw earlier, how to make a really thick slab of felt, which is what I consider to be the traditional process of making felt. Nomads have been doing it and still make fabric like that since over 6,000 years ago. Probably more because it's biodegraded. And there's nothing left. But the Cave of Memories pieces, there's 18 35-foot long pieces that were made originally. And it started out as a reoccurring vision. And I would have dreams about this form. And it just dawned on me that I could make this form, and maybe I was supposed to make this, I thought, but it was just something that was ghost-like and a powerful image taking care of my parents for this period of time. And it was also a challenge to me because all this while I've been making a lot of decorative material that was either based on another fiber. If you look in the forms of felt, you'll see wool felted through a woven fabric. And I challenged myself to make a piece of fabric that was more in touch with just the natural technology of the wool, and therefore being fragile but strong, showing how this material could appear to be fragile and yet not fall apart. And that was sort of my experience during caregiving with my parents as they were aging and being able to live out their life in honor at home, was how fragile life is and yet how strong it is. And so it became a metaphor for this whole experience. I also studied turbulence and how water swirls and the eddies and whirls, and how this is a universal symbol. And so Heather Taylor had come down to my studio, and I'm going to invite her when I'm done with these process pictures to share her perspective of what was going on here, because we were both sort of struck by the fact that we had communicated in some subliminal way, but were talking about the same thing. And she was able to give me language and words that I wasn't able to communicate. And bless your heart, Heather, you said, you're working with something that's pre-language, so of course you can't explain it. But it was that sort of experience that kind of weird, I have to say. So here's the stream of consciousness that when I was laying down the fibers for these, and it was a 40-foot long piece that I would work on primarily, I'd say 80% of the pieces I worked on alone. I had some community support helping me weigh things, but it was a form of meditation and healing. And I just continued to make these spirals. And again, the spiral is the most ancient symbol, not only reoccurring in nature, but in textiles around the world. And a very healing experience. I dedicated this installation to the woman who's on the right, Claudia Cornu, who lived in Mexico, had helped me on 3 different occasions with 3 different of the installations you saw, and passed away from ovarian cancer in 2018. And because the last project she helped me on was one of these pieces of the Cave of Memories, it felt like a fitting thing to dedicate that to her and her family. So here is a time lapse showing me laying out the fibers with the help of community members. I was working downtown, and people came in to learn, to experience, to support me, and the first layer was this very thin wool that was weighed out so that I could make sure that I had complete coverage. Then I would take it to my studio where I would wet it down, because again, same fiber, completely different process. And it took a lot of trial and error to shrink these to the degree that they would hold together and be strong when I hang them on a line or hang them in a museum, but also not fall apart. And every single one of these 18 pieces spent 24 hours outside, back in the environment, after I made them. And so this is after it's been rolled and all the fibers are felted together. And then this is hanging them on the clothesline. And you'll notice in the exhibition that clothesline is a theme. And I know many of us probably grew up hanging clothes on a clothesline. And again, around the world, people still hang clothes on a clothesline. It's a sacred act. It is, and I do have a plan for having a performative piece where people can take these pieces after they've hung in a static gallery, wet them down, honor them with water, and hang them back up again so they can dry and be cleansed. Because the oddest part about making this kind of textile and showing it in an installation is that it doesn't get to move. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't respond with the light. And I call these nomadic installations because I designed 18 pieces that can be put together in an infinite number of ways to respond to the architecture of a particular place. And so that's just a little snippet into the idea of art being not something you just hang on the wall, but art is a way of expressing life and honoring the fibers and materials around you. And I want to, again, recognize John Carlton, who is the multimedia designer that helped me. He edited this footage for me that you see in the gallery, and is the one who took my pictures of fabric and then projected it on the fabric and opened up a whole exciting sort of approach to understanding ways that we can express ourselves. And he took, I think, probably 50 hours of footage that I had taken of all the seasons and edited them down to be what you see as, I sort of call it time travel in the gallery. So this is anytime you make something really big, you have to test hang it. This was a test hang with all the pieces connected, and I'm in a place called Mighty Tieton in eastern Washington. and experimenting with the installation in the Museum of Craft and Design in San Francisco, because when you walk into a museum for an installation site, you have to know what you're doing. You have to have, it's not as wonderful as walking into the gallery and having a sort of plan and knowing how it's going to approach, and then a very flexible, kind person to help you hang it. In a museum, that's just not possible. So that I had the good fortune to be able to hang this 4,000 square feet of fabric down there. And here is an image of the Cave of Memories hanging in San Francisco. So I am going to introduce Heather Taylor. She's one of the artists, actually the first artist that I approached when I had this idea about the jeans. I invited her over for coffee and was like, am I crazy? Like, do you think you would like to do this? Is this enough time? And thanks to her, you see this collaboration happened. But she also, I want her to tell the story of that visit to the studio when I had that gauze model of my Cave of Memories pieces. And are you there? Do you have a mic?
Yes.
And you can take your mask off?
Yeah, thank you, Janice.
Okay, yeah, and I have your images here.
Okay. I'm going to get up here so I can see you, because otherwise I feel blind, and I guess I'll stand over here so you can see me.
Yes.
Yay!
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Janice. And of course, everyone would say in my circumstances, yes, you should do this. So what I want to do is weave together a story, because I think it does what Janice ended with, which is honoring the life of the art and the purpose of art. And if you want to go to the first image. So cryptomnesia is a word that means crypt. It's from the Greek hidden. It's also for death, crypt. And mnesia is memory. And so what Carl Jung said, and this is going to weave in my doctoral dissertation with the Cave of Memories, because what I wanted to do for my dissertation and what I received from, I'm going to say, the art gods, was to create a Cave of Memories. And my dissertation committee, in their infinite stubbornness, hopefully they're not watching this, said no. And so that's the weave-in into Janice creating this. But I want to start with cryptomnesia, is remembering the past. And this is the purpose of art, according to the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung, to give birth to the past. He said, creation is salvation, to give birth to the old in a new time. And it's also the past purpose of art. And art is not meant to be on our walls behind glass and defined borders. You know, as Janice's work exemplifies so beautifully and brilliantly, art is a living thing. And that's what I want to give you this story about. And so art takes us back to the cave. And the cave is the last place, Jung said, where we lived our animals, where we connected to our ancestry and to nature. And so this story speaks to connecting our nature to nature. As again, you can see in Janice's beautiful images of the great sheep, of the grass they eat, of the trees, of the breath of life and the breeze. And go ahead, Janice.
Go with the next.
Yeah, and as we go to the next one, I will say, with that primordial art, the most ancient art we know, Janice was speaking to me about not having words. And I think it's great and appropriate that she doesn't have words. So I'm not even going to seek to correct that in any way, shape, or form, because what we're returning to is a pre-verbal state, an embodied state, and that's part of this cryptomnesia. Art is about giving birth to images from the past, from the unconscious. And so this is art from Carl Jung's Red Book, his creative opus, published in 2009. And you can see on the left the serpent image reminiscent of the Kundalini, reminiscent of the serpent, which is what he called the soul earth, or the earth soul. And that is what we are touching down on here. Notably, it's also the feminine, which is repressed into the unconscious. On the right, you have these animals, and Jung said that the sin of Christ and the lament of the gods, that we didn't live our animal. And so again, this return and this reconnection of our nature with nature, living this fuller capacity. And before we move from Jung here to Janice's purpose, and then I'll weave in our story of our connection, Jung said that what the Bible and religion had edited out was not only animals, but the feminine creative fantasy and early humanity. So in art history is connecting us through this pre-verbal literacy. The root of idea, eidos, is to see. And so it's this different way of knowing. And go ahead, Janice. So this is my cave of memories, and I just want to give you a sense of how different ideas that I think precipitate down from that cloud of unknowable things in Buddhism come through us differently. And so again, Jung said that art comes from the perennial rhizome. It grows in us and through us, that it doesn't come from us. We are not the genius. The art really has an autonomous spirit and a life of its own. And so a similar idea, this cave of memories, ended up coming through my illuminated manuscript when they stopped me from making a cave of memories, and it went into Janice's work of art. And go ahead, Janice. Thanks. And so I want to get to this microrhizomal network, which is an ode to Pat and carbon sequestration work we do as well. But I want to tell you the quick story of how art has a life of its own beyond any one of us and connects us to the past. And so I had been stopped from creating my cave of memories. I'm talking to Janice, who's telling me about this cave with light filtering in, and I'm reading a book on cave, Plato's cave and light. And we're talking in her studio, and I'm realizing what was aborted in me, my cave of memories, she is already making in a way beyond anything I could make. And that whereas I may have verbal words for it, she has just this somatic genius for the felt sense of felt being embodied in this cave of memories. And I want to dovetail back or circle back to her concept of the life of art. Again, that it's like this plant that grows in us and through us, through the psychic soil of the unconscious that connects us all. Because as much as this is Janice's exhibit, and it totally is, and it's beautiful, the art has a life of its own. And so I really want to land on that like this rhizomal network that communicates to the forest, communicates and educates, that we can get in touch through art with something that connects us. And you had the attribution to the woman who died of cancer. And so the example that I will give is that a friend of mine that I dedicated my dissertation to created alchemical golden eggs in all of the places that she had tumors years before she died, and she died of glioblastoma brain tumors. That is a very rapid death. So time and time again, it's the precognitive ability of art that can manifest through Janice and bring us together through synchronicity when I can't do something. And so I end on this image because I'm hoping that, like the spores, we are in the mushroom capital of the world as they're fruiting around us. That the spores of the art that she has so beautifully made and been contributed by others can come alive and take a new incarnational form in you guys as you perceive it and as it is absorbed into your state of consciousness. So I wanted to do an ode to Janice for her ongoing brilliance, and then also just to that past concept of art, that it is an autonomous being with a life of its own. Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting, I'll just add one comment. I have a few words for it, and I'm so appreciative of Heather's ability to articulate all of that and her kind accolades. They make me emotional. But it's fascinating when I work with community groups. You saw probably in the running projects, when people experience this process, it is beyond words again. When they see these individual fibers that are weak on their own becoming strong by putting them together is a powerful metaphor for working together. And when you look at the Cave of Memories pieces, when we go back in the gallery, I'll show you, you can handle some of those pieces. I want you to put your hands on them. They don't look like they're fragile, but they are dying to be touched. They are resting on the ground, not because there's too much fabric, but that's where the fabric came from. So the piles of fabric on the ground are actually the respect to the earth, and they're coming out of it to share with us what this vision of interconnectedness, whether it's under the earth or in the sky, has as an ongoing way that is happening whether we're aware of it or not. So thank you so much for being here. And it's a powerful thing to have a community of people to come, and I appreciate your time and all the love and attention that all of you have donated tonight and in helping me over the years. And we can go into the gallery, and I'm sure the artists would be happy to answer questions about their sculptures, and I'm happy as well.
Do you want to take some questions real quick?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, Sean, thank you. So, yes, I'll step away from this.
I could kick us off with a question real quick, and
Great.
and then maybe somebody want to follow up with it. But so one of the things that I've loved about working with you on this project and is seeing the amount of I apologize for the music back there. They're doing auditions or something like that, tryouts or something. We share this space with a lot of people in the community. So, but you bring so much in-depth research to felt. Something that I relied on a lot in the north, just felt gloves over some sort of plastic, polypropylene liner. But
Right.
the felt was always there for us, and so there's so much information that you provide with things like that, and looking at the slideshow earlier, just this long history of working with felt and these wonderful installations and groups that you've worked with. But there's just one question hanging over my head
Yeah.
tonight, and that is what's next?
I don't know. I would definitely want to take these Cave of Memories pieces and have them have more places to reach more people, and in a performative piece like I had described. But I'm also really, as I've now had 3 hips replaced from the heavy work that I do with making these thick slabs, I'm sort of ready not to work quite so huge scale. And maybe that's one of the reasons I'm doing lighter weight things. But the exploring the interior life of my fabric has really got me excited. And so that's probably working on a book that talks about some of those projects, because they're certainly stories in themselves and dramas and exciting discoveries.
Are there plans for projections for
Absolutely.
that
So
sculptural?
so thank you. There is a museum in Italy, in Prato, Italy, an old museum of textiles that's now a textile museum, the Museum del Tessuto. And they have been wanting me to come and bring not only my Palace here piece, but now I have this body of panels that we can project on thanks to this exhibition here. I got to experiment with that technique, and I'm really excited to take that forward. It's a journey, and I have sort of had to block it out of my head because COVID has changed so much of everything around the world. Wool is antimicrobial on its own. And just a little other note is that probably the gallery has the most toxin-free air that it's ever had, because wool actually filters the toxins out of the air and holds it. So there's research papers showing how formaldehyde will actually disappear in a building, in a room, and be absorbed by the fiber and never let it go. It's a miracle fiber. I swear, if it was discovered now, that would be like a space-age fabric. But we take it for granted, as we do the animal. But, yeah.
In my view, you're a mix between Julie Taymor and Franco Zeffirelli. And I would,
You're funny.
I would like to, you know, I think you should think more about theater, grand theater, because you have the wherewithal to pull that off, and you know people who can collaborate.
Well, heck, there's more collaboration to come then. I know.
Yeah, I would say that from the slides of your theatrical work and the need to work smaller but still with intensity and vibrancy, I would say grand theater that is off the stage but still very theatrical would be a very good thing to do, to think about.
You're like a fortune teller.
Yeah.
I love it. I hope so. Keep talking.
Yeah, definitely advising and consulting on
Oh, yeah.
projects.
Well, the problem is my brain doesn't stop, as my family knows. Like, I will just continue imagining things, and most of these things, almost these projects have possessed me. You know, in one of the last lectures I did before the pandemic, I opened it with saying, I have a confession to make. I'm an addict. I'm an addict making art, and it takes over. I mean, it literally consumes my brain. So that's a part I'm trying to find some balance with. But
She beat you to it.
Poor Lucy always gets beat out.
wait.
I'm sorry. I said poor Lucy always gets beat out. I know you're Janice, outside of your art primarily, but a question that I have, I think a lot of folks are intimidated by starting art or getting into art or doing art for a lot of different reasons. But I guess my question is, what kind of advice do you have for someone who may be interested in getting started but doesn't know what to do?
that's a great question. And I know that I was privileged in having a family that gave me tools instead of toys. The first step is to have people recognize that these hands are probably the most sophisticated tool that any of us can ever imagine. We don't need electronics, and we don't need, we can make things with this, and we can create our own maps based on the idea of wonder and curiosity. So the other element of wonder and curiosity is the element of being willing to make a mistake. We live in an era where you see all this perfect stuff online. You can look up how to do something, and you don't discover it on your own, and then you get angry when it doesn't work because it didn't work the way they showed you. If I had taken a class to learn how to make felt, I probably never would have gone into the field, ever, because it wasn't a discovery. But it's simply trying to recreate, and this is why I love felt. It's like, I remember going to a community days in Tieton where they were having community involvement, and an engineer from Intel was there, and they made a ball of felt. And this is just a process that's I could teach all of you in 30 minutes how to do it. And what you have done is a perfect sphere, like the beads of water on that screen. And this engineer called me a week later and said, "You changed my life. You changed my life." And I'm thinking, what? I changed your life? You work for Intel? And they said, because I look at materials differently now. I don't wonder, or I don't look at them and know what they're going to be. I think about what they could be. And so it's also embracing potential. It's the potential of what something might be and looking at it from the other side. Lucy, you had a question?
I'm just curious, did you design your own roller? Did you design your own roller machine?
No, actually I didn't. I was designing one. It's a very simple machine, and I got the Cirque du Soleil commission. And a colleague of mine, I was talking to her. She was Lane Goldsmith, the director of textiles for University of Washington until they closed that department down. She said, "Oh, well, you should come and take a look at mine before you build yours." And hers was built out of Boeing surplus parts. And when I looked at it and realized, you know, my husband's an amazing engineer, we could do this, but it might take us 6 months, and I got to start working like soon. And so I asked if I could rent it, and then she sold it to me. So yeah, I'm very lucky, fortunate.
So how did you get into felt in the beginning? What was the spark that made felt your obsession?
So that's one of the stories, sort of my origin story that I tell. I'll tell it in a nutshell. But I had been working for visual merchandising at Nordstrom, and was given an artist on the side, you know, making textile batik and weaving and things like that, working with fine fiber. And they came to me and said, "We want to do sculptures out of felt for the windows for fall." And this was 1999. And I had seen handmade felt, but I had never made it. So I found somebody who could show me how to make a square felt, or a square pad. And I went in and I said, "You know, industrial felt has a really boring palette. What if we could match the colors of fall in this handmade material?" And they were like, "Show us more samples, you know." My mother always said, "Be careful what you wish for." You know, they ordered 200 sculptures. And I had only made a piece of felt this big. Luckily, I grew up with an attitude of, it's not can I do something, but how can I do something? And that's when I started studying ethnographic felt making. So that was back when it was obscure. I called 3 different felt masters that someone had told me, "Oh, you've got to talk to so-and-so and so-and-so." And the response with every 3 phone calls was the same. I'd say, "Hi, my name is Janice Arnold, and I want to make about 1,400 square yards of handmade felt in the next 4 months. Do you have any advice for me?" There'd be this dead silence. And the response was, "Are you crazy?" So, yes, I was crazy. But thanks to my kids and their friends, and you know, all of them have gone on to amazing jobs and lives, and talk about how felt was their first job, but also a remarkable way of learning about making. But anyway, thank you for that question. So I don't know what time it is.
Okay, well, it's a little after 7:30. Yeah, 7:34, but it's
Should we go
retire to
in?
the gallery.
Yeah, I mean, if you're welcome to join me in the gallery if you have specific questions. There, yes, oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Janice. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Really fun. And I will allow you to touch that fabric that's hanging, and you'll see how strong it is.
water.